So in the this is Pogues-RUM, Sodomy, and the Lash, and the opening
all
montage.
Things you like.
That's right. This is a perfect album for me.
In what order?
Any order, doesn't matter. So the opening montage, you heard a clip from Sally McIlhenny, and right now you're going to hear a clip from A Pair of Brown Eyes. So this is the Pogues-RUM, Sodomy, and the Lash. It's their second studio album that was released on August 5th, 1985. Did pretty well. It's considered their best album, and sold pretty well. It reached number 13 on the UK charts. And the origins of this band started in 1977 in the bathroom of the Roadhouse in London during a Ramones show, where Shane MacGowan met Peter Stacey, also known as Spider, and that resulted in them forming a band called the Millwall Chainsaws.
Does it not sound like that's where you would encounter Rum, Sodomy, and the Lash in that bathroom?
The Ramones bathroom.
And the Ramones bathroom. Mm-hmm. Yep. So MacGowan was the vocalist, and Stacey played the tin whistle, and they also had Jem Finer, who played the banjo. MacGowan was already with another band called The Nips, but they broke up in 1980, and and he focused more of his time with the Millwall Chainsaws.
Heard that a cold, icy sound, Matt.
Yeah. Cold, icy sound? Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
In 82, former Nips guitarist James Fernley joined the band. He was the accordion player, so they're having a lot of interesting instruments come through here, not the traditional ones that we've been hearing on CTS
tin
as
whistle.
of late. Tin whistle.
Do I need to learn the tin whistle?
Well, it's the whistle that's the tin whistle, the Irish tin whistle, man. Yeah.
Is it like a little like a recorder, but a smaller version?
It is pretty much like a little recorder. Yes,
okay,
that's good. That's a good way of putting it. Yep.
What I want to know is
made of tin. And
what I want to know is like, how do you like pick that as your instrument of all the instruments you could have? It's like my niche is going to be the tin whistle. Like, is it like a family thing that it's passed to you, or do you come across a tin whistler? Are there more of them in Scotland?
I think it's one of those things there's no explanation. You just fall into it. It just happens.
Is it like a recorder in the States where everybody plays it when they're in second grade and then he just stayed with it?
It could be the UK or the Irish version of the recorder.
But maybe it's like one of those things where people just pick up at bars and they need a tin whistle player, so that guy comes in. I don't know.
So I apologize.
Yes, to all of it.
Earlier. I'm mixing up my bands since I'm doing my Ireland.
Irish, yeah. Ooh. Okay. Oh, there's going to be some angry listeners.
I know. That's why I made sure I corrected. Well, the reason is because I got Jesus and Mary Chain, and they're from Scotland. And
okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
so,
good point. In 82, former Nips guitarist... Oh, sorry, I talked about that. He joined with the accordion, and at this time they changed their name to Pogue Mahone, which is a Anglicization of the Gaelic phrase, which means what, guys? What does Pogue Mahone mean? Nobody knows.
Fuck the British. I don't know.
Close. Kiss my arse.
Kiss my arse. Yeah.
Kiss my arse. Yes.
It always comes back to some variation of that, doesn't it?
They later added Kate O'Riordan on bass and Andrew Rankin on drums, and spent this time playing small clubs and pubs in and around London, and started earning recognition for their live performances and also national airplay on BBC Radio 1. They came to the attention of Stiff Records, who we've talked about several times before, while opening.
I think we mentioned that they would have been our record company.
Stiff Records,
yeah, Stiff Records, definitely.
Yep. While they were opening for the Clash in 1984, and they signed a deal with a label at that time, and then they had to shorten their name to the Pogues after being censored on the BBC following complaints from Gaelic speakers in Scotland. Then they released their first album, Red Roses for Me, in October of 84.
Do you want to imitate what a call to the switchboard would have sounded like there, Matt, or no?
I don't have a good Scottish accent.
Please.
I don't trust it.
Oh, man. We need someone who has that talent. It's a shame. It's a missing act for us.
Sound like groundskeeper Willie, I'm sure.
I have the words of the joke I'd want to tell, and it would be funny, but my awful attempt at a Scottish accent would ruin it, so I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah, that's why I try not to do that stuff, because it's not going to come out good, so... I don't have that skill set.
No.
So they gained some more attention when the UK Channel 4's music show The Tube made a video of their version of a song called Waxy's Dargle. It featured Spider Stacey repeatedly smashing himself over the head with a beer tray and became a favorite with the viewers, but Stiff Records refused to release it as a single, feeling that it was too late to help Red Roses for Me. Nevertheless, it remained a favorite request of their show for many years, and then they started recording their second album, which is the one we're covering tonight, adding guitarist Philip Chevron to the lineup. And this album, fellas, was produced by Elvis Costello, who was originally employed to produce only 2 songs for the band, but then as he started working with them, he agreed to produce the whole album.
He got to drinking.
I'm sure he did. Yes.
Yeah. I just laugh. It's like the old Irish. You got to drinking, and then next thing you know,
I'm producing the Pogues.
The pub, and I'm producing the whole album.
So this record's known as a little bit of a departure from their previous album because there weren't as many covers. This was more of McGowan, creating his own original work. Guitar Chevron later said that the Pogues needed more than anything not to be so much as produced as facilitated, and that recording the band was live as much as possible, but with a great deal of natural acoustic presence to the instruments. It was quite a revolutionary thing to do in 1985. And Costello said, quote, "I saw my task was to capture them in their dilapidated glory before some personal producer fucked them up." The album's title, have you guys ever heard of this phrase before? Rum, Sodomy, and the Lash? No. That was a quotation that was falsely attributed to Winston Churchill.
I was going to say I thought it was a Winston Churchill comment. Yeah.
Yeah, but apparently it wasn't. So I'm not sure where it came from. But supposedly somebody at one point said that Churchill would say, "Don't talk to me about naval tradition. It's nothing but rum, sodomy, and the lash." And the title was suggested by the drummer Andrew Rankin, who said, "It seemed to sum up our life in the band pretty much." So,
fair enough.
Yep.
So it's not from Winston Churchill, though.
It's not. No.
Okay.
It's
from the
misquote.
Bible.
No. It's from the Bible.
It's apocryphal.
Yes. So that's pretty much the history that I have on this record, and quite a different sound, I think, than what we have been used to. But I'm gonna start. I think I kind of know how John tipped his hand a little bit with a text he sent us earlier this week. So I'm gonna start with Josh and get his take.
Yeah. So this is actually an album of my own. So before
okay.
I have listened to
really?
this.
Okay.
Yeah, and a more modern day band that people may know of, Flogging Molly, they kind of sound similar to this in a lot of respects, and I'm sure they were inspired by them. So I really kind of like this upbeat, like kind of traditional Irish bar type of music with kind of a little bit of an edge to it, a band that you could sing the songs to when they're probably half drunk or when you're half drunk. And so I enjoyed this album. I like the sense of humor to it. I like the incorporation of, I think a lot of these songs are more traditional songs that have been kind of reinvented or sung hundreds of different times over the years by different bands, and I think they've put their own spin on it, so I really like that. I think there's a lot of traditional Irish tropes in here, maybe about death or just kind of like working class life or life in a small town, drinking life. I actually saw the movie Banshees of Inisherin recently. That's the Colin Farrell movie that's out this year, and about a small town in Ireland, and it really reminded me of kind of the aesthetic or vibe that this album brings to it. They're almost in some ways like a little bit like Bruce Springsteen in a way, and that they're like, reminiscing and maybe thinking about, fonder times, but maybe it's through rose-colored glasses. Although now that I say that, a lot of these are pretty harsh songs in a lot of ways. So maybe that's not entirely accurate. I like the instrumentation on this album as well. I like kind of the accordion and the fiddle and even the tin whistle when that comes in, and there's a harmonica on Navigator that I really liked, and I think there's some not bagpipes but kind of like Irish bagpipes on here, I think, and I like that too. And I paid attention to the lyrics too a lot this time, so you get a good sense of what the song's about, and I think part of that is that they're like fun to sing along to, and the kind of the choruses and the the verses sometimes repeat, so you can pick up the words pretty easily and sing along to them. So that's another thing I like. Does it reinvent the wheel? No. Compared to other albums that we've listened to, but from 85 and to not really hear anything like this at the time, I can see kind of how it's not revolutionary, but unique or novel, I should say. We've talked about Irish folk and British folk going all the way back to Fairport Convention back in the 60s and things like that, and I think this is just the latest, in 85, the latest iteration of those traditions in more modern context. And yeah, thumbs up for me. It's completely enjoyable. Is it gonna blow your mind? No, but you probably have heard something similar to this before, and they do it really well. I think they're probably one of the best bands to do this type of music. So thumbs up for me.
So my knowledge of the Pogues actually was some of the stuff they did in the early 90s when I think McGowan was gone from the band already, Shane McGowan. Actually, a song I really like of them is a song called Tuesday Morning. And at that time, they were clearly an Irish-inspired band, but it was sort of not all in, what I consider to be that, as Matt said way back in the day when we covered Fairport Convention, right? That trad, I guess, would be the sound, right? Mm-hmm. The folk and the Irish stylings. I became when I start listening to the album, I say, okay, Headspace. I became immediately aware. Okay, this is gonna be all in on that trad sound, and so one of the things that I really am trying to do on this podcast is not have a genre of music that's unattainable to me. Really kind of. If there's something that my first instinct is, this is not usually a genre I like, I try to listen to it multiple times in multiple different scenarios to see if it can transcend it. And mm-hmm. This album was very much an album that for me, I had to listen to when I was in a sort of more carefree, relaxed state. And then the songs sort of hit me well. But the second I was in anything but that state, this type of sound really agitates me for some reason. And so it's such an interesting thing because I think it brings joy to so many people, this sound. And full disclosure, I don't know your guys' roots, but I'm pretty Irish on my side, so I think it's kind of funny that the Irish sound doesn't always hit with me. Now the sense of humor and the storytelling of it does, but it is, it's that mix of upbeat, sort of tributes or testimonies to the fallen or the mm-hmm. flawed or the whimsical, even folk, folklore-y, mythical, mixed with the songs that are funereal, I would say, a lot of death, a lot of despair, loneliness. Mm-hmm. There's a lot. The last song is a Waltzing Matilda. I think the protagonist is Australian, if I remember. But
yeah, it's about Gallipoli, basically.
Yeah, and basically it's about the horrors of war, and then he loses a leg, and a fate worse than death, and then he goes to a parade at the end, and it's profound, certainly, as a piece, but it's in that tradition of funereal sort of Irish drinking songs, and mm-hmm. that's. This album also, I think, is almost impossible to detach from pub culture. Yeah. I just think it's so much ensconced in that. There's lots of talk of booze and relationships and their tension. All of the stereotypical themes that I think we think of as small town Irish life type themes, mm-hmm. and for good reason, because they're themes that are equal parts celebrated and reviled in equal parts, right? Yep. Even in my own family, right? Yeah, Irish themes, and then what are called the Black Irish, right? Themes that are there, mm-hmm. The darker themes, right? But so from that end of things, you immediately realize musically that you've got many of the traditional players in terms of sounds, right? In terms of what's coming on here, you've got banjo, you've got mandolin, you've got the accordion, the tin whistle, right? Mm-hmm. You've got the fiddle is there. I had to look up one thing. It turns out it was I want to say Uilleann pipes, Uilleann pipes. And I'm like, okay, that's what that sound is, because it said the song. So I'm like, okay, I wasn't quite sure what the name of the instrument was. And and traditional instrumentation too. The bass, you've got guitar, vocalist, and singing. But yeah, if you have heard like what we would call traditional Irish music. And I think the other thing that hurts it, guys, is that there's a lot of bad versions of this music that's played in Irish themed bars and stuff like that. That's like really watered down versions of this, to the point where I think when you see the real item like this, it bleeds together a little bit for me sometimes, which is certainly not fair, because the level of instrumentation here is so much higher, and stuff like that. They really are. I know you guys mentioned like the greatest bar band of all time, and we think about it as like sort of like in a blues oriented thing, but this in their own way, right, is kind of like the greatest, pub band you could ever imagine. And so I would say, for a genre of music that I don't love, this represents one of the better albums I've ever heard of the sort. And so for that, it has to be a strong recommend, right? Because I sort of catalog it as where to start with this sound. And I give a lot more points when an album is able to transcend my natural tendencies for what I like and I do not like. And this album, once I realized what it was and put myself in the right context, when I was in that right context, it was an enjoyable listen. And it breezed by a lot earlier than I thought. Another thing that I didn't realize was the first time I listened to it, I must have listened to what was the extended version. And like an hour and 10 minutes of this is a lot different than 40 minutes of it. So I will say that difference of 30 minutes makes a huge difference in terms of, especially when you're listening to it sober. I would say, and not in that context. Yeah. So I would say that I would start with the non-extended version of this album, the traditional album, the 12-track album. So there you go, Matt.
Yeah. I thought you might kind of feel that about this album the way you did about the Blasters, that it wasn't reinventing the wheel, but that it was enjoyable.
I mean,
enough.
It isn't, because I look at this genre. One of the reasons this genre doesn't always click with me is because I think the lane is limited in the genre. It's why I also don't like things that are adjacent to this, like Mumford and Sons and Lumineers type music, because I feel like there's only so much you can do with that type of music. Jam bands, those things, where I feel like there's like limitations to the genre a little bit, I guess would be what I would describe. And now, in fairness, there's things like punk that also have limitations to the genre that I like quite a bit. So, then it goes down to you attribute it to personal preference. But I like this album more than I like the Blasters album, if you're wondering.
Got it.
Well, first of all, I forgot to do the numbers, so let me get that out of the way. So this Rum Sodomy Lash is number 101 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 12 in 1985, number 678 of all time. It is the Pogues' highest-rated album on Best Ever Albums, and they come in at number 373 of overall artist rankings in Best Ever Albums. And also, it didn't make Rolling Stone's list. I don't think any of the albums tonight made Rolling Stone's list, so there you go. So I didn't really... What I know from the Pogues is Fairy Tale of New Year's. I talked about Merry Christmas, everybody, right? Like that came out a couple of years after. I think that's from 1987. So you're probably hearing a lot of that Irish Christmas song. That is the Pogues, if you were wondering. So this album is, I very much liked it. A lot of it reminded me of I did spend a semester in Dublin when I was in college, and I don't think we could do an
Irish album without you mentioning that, Matt. That's like your
for context.
But I don't know if I talked about like how, like what, and when I was listening to this album this week, I was just reminded of the various like pubs that I went to, and I saw all kinds of trad, and I loved it. It was like, we talked about like some of the best shows that I've seen, like usually in the context of like a concert or at a club somewhere, but like I really got into the stuff when I was in Ireland, and not just in Dublin, but in small towns across the country that we would go to. That this stuff is everywhere, and this is probably more of a modernized version of what you're going to get in in Ireland, because that you're going some of those places you're getting really traditional stuff, and this is starting to weave a little bit into the lane of more popular music, which would later, you get bands like Dropkick Murphys would come out of this, and they would kind of they'd take that and they would punkify it, if you will, right? Like made it much more punk, and and you can see
there's
some of the
ska and a punk offshoot of this, which I think Josh has always been a little bit more of a fan of than me in terms of that lane. Yeah, and you could see, and you can hear there's punk elements to this here, as well as country. There's what is it? Dirty Old Town is very much a country song, when you got that plucking that banjo like that. And then you have the traditional Irish music in there. By the way, it's also funny that these guys are English and they're doing the Irish music like this. I think it's kind of funny, but yeah, it's a lot of fun for me to like listen to this stuff. And even though, I think it's a little bit of a different experience listening to it as a record, just in your car or in your house or whatever, as opposed to actually being in a legit Irish pub where this is just what's happening. This is happening all the time across that country, and so for that, I very much appreciate it for that. But it's another little palate cleanser, a la like the blasters that we had last week, which is just very different than what you're getting from a lot of the other albums that we're covering. The two other albums that we're going to cover tonight are very different. One's very much in the lane of the 80s, and the other one's kind of like kind of progressing music in a different direction that we haven't really heard of before. And this is kind of going not just like back, but going way back. I mean, there's songs in here for the, traditional song for like the 1600s and stuff that they're rearranging. That happens in a lot of, British and Irish folk music. So, but I like that. You're right, John. There's only so much you can do with this. Even though you are delving into different genres, it's not totally in one lane. I mean, when you can listen to an album and see elements of punk, but also see elements of country. I mean, there's and also Irish traditional. There's variety there, but it's also done within the context of a certain sound that's kind of that does kind of blend together. So I do see what you're saying about that. No, but what makes them so skilled is the fact that this music absolutely can blend together. And one of the things I'll give them credit for is there was quite a bit of differentiation within the genre compared to what I'm used to, which was a huge plus for me. Like you said, because like Dirty Old Town and like Wildcats of Kilkenny and the opening track, right? The Sickbed of Cuckulain. And like they're all, they have elements that are the same, but it's not like you're kind of getting the same Irish drinking song 12 times in a row, which is your fear whenever you get this. And there is a lot of that, right? That is that, it's like, okay, 12 times. This was not that. And so like I do want to draw a distinction that like I was able to, even if it's not my favorite type of music, immediately pick out the other influences and the differentiation within the theme, which is why I put this sort of to the top of the genre of what I've heard.
And I kind of like this better. I mean, I have seen Dropkick Murphys before, and I've seen, they definitely kind of take this and they electrify it more, I think, and they make it more. It's like a bigger sound. This is more of a folk sound, and I think I do like this better. I think, but a lot more
chants too. Like Dropkick Murphys is a lot more of the chanting. Like
it's
call and response.
Call and response, and look, and they put on a hell of a show, and it's fun. So it definitely, to me, this stuff definitely has its place. I'm not terribly familiar in a lot of the different artists that play this type of music, but when something comes across, my plate that I'm like, like this, I'm going to pay attention to it, and I think this is really good. I mean, it's a solid song. I actually paid attention to some of the lyrics. I really like the lyrics too. And it's not their song, but the band played Waltzing Matilda. The last song is a song by a guy named Eric Bogle. And I thought the lyrics of that were very good. Lots of stories. These are stories of people that are downtrodden, they're drunk, they're getting thrown in into the slammer, and or going off to war. There's a lot of, it's like this is a somewhat political. Some of these songs are political in nature as well.
It's interesting. These similar too they have that I can wait, Matt, till you're finished. I think you'd be curious though. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but I was basically just finishing up. But I liked the kind of the stories that he was telling. I like his voice. He's got like a cool raspy, voice for this. So it's different. It's unique. It's fun. And it's got great melodies. Like, what is it? What's the song? I'm a Man You Don't Meet Every Day. It's actually sung by Kate O'Riordan, one of the female member of the band, and she sounds great on it. So I'm thumbs up on it. It's probably not going to make my top of the decade, but it's a really enjoyable record. It's very good, and there's definitely a place for this. So thumbs up from me.
Well, the themes of the songs too are kind of like timeless. They're not set in like 80s, England per se. They're not writing about contemporary life. They're singing about these could be any decade that they're singing about these things. So I think that's another thing that kind of, at least for me, it doesn't sound like the 80s. It transcends the 80s in that respect, and I think you could listen to it at any time based on that.
Yeah, they mention when they have similar too, which is usually contemporaries, right? They do have Dexy's Midnight Runners, which I can see, and Billy Bragg, which is that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
They also though have two bands that I hadn't thought of, but that I get why they're coming from. And the Violent Femmes is one they put on there, which kind of is interesting. The more I think about it, like, it doesn't sound the same, but thematically, I kind of get where they're coming from. And they mentioned the Replacements, which I think is interesting too. Once again, I don't think they're there. Yeah, not well, but this could be too, in its own way. Now, Followed By is like a greatest hits for like both of you guys, which I think explains this. You got the Decemberists, which and then Ted Leo and the Pharmacists, the Libertines are on there. Dropkick Murphys, which you mentioned, Flogging Molly is also on there. So I think without even kind of following up on this, there's we were able to make a lot of connections because it comes from a musical lineage of different stuff, and it's the same musical lineage that other grabbed onto. So in case you're wondering and you're more familiar with those bands, I like to give that context sometimes, because I think for people that are listening and still feel they need a little bit more of a genre blend, I like to at the end sometimes put that in. So there you go. But sounds like thumbs up for you guys. Thumbs up for the genre for me. Thumbs in the middle overall for me, which is pretty huge, all things considered. I think because pretty famously, this is not my lane. So for a group to kind of be something that I did not hate in this and actually many times liked is a pretty big accomplishment.
Well,
so
your initial text reaction. Yeah, your initial text reaction was the Krusty the Clown.
Remember, I said I hadn't listened to the album.
Yeah.
Right. I said I looked and it said a folk punk band. And yes, my initial reaction to folk punk band is like, oof, it's...
But you did like the Violet Femmes, though, right? Because I think that was kind of what we determined that the Violet Femmes were, pretty much.
Folk punk?
Yeah.
I mean, I love the Violent Femmes album. I think that they operated in a different spot,
or acoustic at least. Like it
was definitely acoustic. I don't know how folk it was. Yeah. So, but yeah.
Yeah.
So
well, this is the anybody else? Anything else, Josh? No.
Nope.
Yeah. This is the only Pogues album that we are covering. So just a quick postscript on the band. Actually, shortly after this album, O'Riordan left the band and she married Elvis Costello. So there was a romance that came out of this. So there you go. As I mentioned, they released Fairy Tale of New York in 1987, which has been voted as best Christmas song several times over the years by VH1 UK. And it was actually banned in 2000 for a period of time because of the use of the word faggot that they use in the song, that they were deemed offensive. But then it's kind of a weird thing, but then there was such an outcry against them banning it that they actually brought it back. So it's like a reverse cancel that happened with the song there. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So you can still hear that song in the UK. Lead singer Shane MacGowan became increasingly unreliable in the next year or so. He failed to show up at some of the shows and just it was kind of an untenable situation for the rest of the band. So they kicked him out.
The drink or mental
I think
health,
drinking.
or...
I think he was.
Okay.
Yeah, I just think there was also a clash of personalities and stuff. And he's got a strong personality. He's also his politics which I found out like in later years were very much right-wing politics and stuff, and wanting to kind of incorporate, some of that stuff into the music that was
seems
not
to
really...
be a thing with like Irish origin pop artists, right? That's kind of like where Van Morrison ended up, right? Like Morrissey kind of ended up that way.
Yeah.
Like, it seems to be a common theme. Well, I guess Bono went all
opposite.
politics.
Yeah.
Well, just sort of apolitical to some degree. So, yeah.
So after he gets kicked out, Joe Strummer took over for a period of time as the lead singer of the Pogues.
That's a little more of the Pogues I'm familiar with, that era.
Yeah.
And I got to them because of Joe Strummer, yeah.
Okay. So he was there I don't even think he was there for a year before they finally took Spider Stacy as the lead singer. He took over. And they went through several lineup changes after that, and they finally broke up in 1996. And then a bunch of those members went on to form all kinds of other bands, recording with other people and things like that. But they all did reform in 2001, along with Shane MacGowan, for a Christmas tour. And that started what would become a 13-year stint of various tours throughout the years. But they didn't do any other studio records. And their last performance was on August 9th, 2014 in France. And when asked about the future of the band, MacGowan said, quote, "I went back with the Pogues and we grew to hate each other all over again. I don't hate the band at all. They're friends. I like them a lot. We were friends for years before we joined the band. We just got a bit sick of each other. We're friends as long as we don't tour together. I've done a hell of a lot of touring. I've had enough of it." And so there you go. That's the story with the Pogues.
Nice. I think that's probably a understandable sentiment about getting sick of touring, especially with the same people over and over again.
Yeah.
I barely can tolerate doing the show with you guys once a week.
We don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
We
can
never
stay
see
home.
each other.
Yeah.